This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Mark Lobel, and in the early hours of Thursday, the 8th of August, these are our main stories. Donald Trump has visited Dayton and El Paso, two American cities where mass shootings at the weekend cost 31 lives. But not everybody was happy to see the president. Another deadly attack in the Afghan capital as peace talks with the Taliban continue. And a warning from the United Nations that millions of Zimbabweans are facing starvation. Also in this podcast, a new television drama depicting the Monica Lewinsky saga in the White House. And bringing home the bacon. Will Danish producers still sell to Britain if a no-deal Brexit means fat tariffs?
Of course we need to look at alternatives, because if you look at the rhetoric from the British government, then it's do or die.
But first, President Trump has been visiting Dayton and El Paso for the first time since the mass shootings in the two cities at the weekend, which cost over 30 lives. His supporters claimed he was treated like a rock star when he visited a hospital in Dayton, but protesters there called for tighter gun controls. Other politicians also weighed in. At a campaign rally, the Democratic presidential contender Joe Biden criticized Mr. Trump's earlier statement condemning the attacks.
This president has fanned the flames of white supremacy in this nation. His low energy, vacant-eyed mouthing of the words written for him, condemning white supremacists this week, I don't believe fooled anyone.
President Trump responded by tweeting that Mr. Biden's speech was so boring, apparently whilst in the air between Dayton and El Paso. I spoke to our correspondent Sophie Long during Mr. Trump's visit to El Paso, and I asked her how things looked there.
Well, President Trump arrived here in El Paso in broiling Texas heat. He's currently at the hospital visiting first responders and victim survivors and their families. Now, reporters aren't actually with the president as he does that, but his press secretary has told them that people were very warm towards him, everybody received him very well, and everybody was very, very excited to see him. So that's what we're getting from the press secretary. The president and first lady are still at the hospital, I believe. I am just at the Walmart superstore, where a huge sea of flowers has been growing over the 4 days since this shooting took place on Saturday. 22 people killed here. Emotions here, Mark, are very high indeed. Even in the hours before President Trump arrived here in El Paso, I spoke to people and asked them whether they welcomed his trip. One woman told me, she said she thought it was absolutely vile, disgusting. She said that this situation happened because of the situation created by his rhetoric and his open racism. She said he is not welcome here and he is not my president. At the same time, though, I've spoken to people who are very pleased that the president is coming and say that he should come. Something really terrible happened here. This community has been shaken, and that he should come and pay his respects, and that they welcome him. Of course, you've got all the people in between as well. A lot of people here are very conflicted. They say to me that yes, they want the president to come, but it's unfortunate that it's this president, and it's unfortunate that he said the things he had. Now, a lot of people here echo what you heard from Joe Biden there, including Beto O'Rourke. He is another Democratic presidential hopeful. He left the campaign trail as soon as this happened on Saturday and came to El Paso. This is his hometown, and he's been going to vigils over the past 4 days, and he's been very clear about the fact that he believes that Trump's harsh rhetoric on immigration has helped create a situation in which this happened. You've got to remember that El Paso has a huge Hispanic majority. It's more than 80% Hispanic, this population. So a lot of people here feel very sensitive about what President Trump has said in the past, and of course also about his visit.
Sophie Long in El Paso. As peace talks continue between the Taliban and the US, with the aim of ending nearly 2 decades of conflict in Afghanistan, residents in the capital Kabul are still coming to terms with the latest deadly attack there. Officials say at least 14 people were killed and nearly 150 injured after a car bomb exploded outside a police station. The Taliban say they carried out the attack. It's the latest in a recent surge in violence across the country where, in the last month alone, about 1,500 people have been killed or injured. Reporting from Kabul, here's our correspondent Secunda Kamani.
In video footage of the aftermath of the explosion, a huge plume of smoke can be seen rising above the site of the attack. A number of buildings nearby appear to have been largely destroyed.
I was driving in the area when I heard a terrible sound, an explosion. My car was shaking. Right after that, I saw the windows, all the nearby shops blown in.
The attack comes in spite of progress between Taliban and American officials who have been holding negotiations in Qatar aimed at reaching a peace deal. The final exact terms of that settlement aren't yet clear, but are thought to include commitments to withdraw international forces from the country and the start of talks between the Taliban and other Afghan representatives. However, many fear it won't include an immediate declaration of a ceasefire, meaning for the moment, violence on the ground will continue. In the first half of this year alone, more than 1,000 civilians have lost their lives as a result of the conflict.
Secunda Kamani in Kabul. A possible blueprint for a safe zone in northeastern Syria has been hammered out. Turkey and the United States have agreed to establish a joint operations centre to put to rest Ankara's security fears after threats of a Turkish military assault if an agreement wasn't reached. I asked our Middle East analyst Alan Johnston why Turkey had become so concerned about developments in northern Syria.
In the far north of Syria, the majority population is actually ethnic Kurdish, and in the chaos of Syria's civil war, these Syrian Kurds have taken control of their region, carved out almost a mini-state of their own, and Turkey has been appalled by all this. The Turks see those Syrian Kurdish fighters as terrorists, closely linked to Kurdish fighters who have waged a long insurgency inside Turkish territory itself. So the Turks have wanted a buffer zone all along their southern border, about 30 miles wide, that would push back these Syrian Kurdish fighters from the frontier. But there's been a problem. The Syrian Kurds are closely allied with the US. They fought alongside the Americans against the Islamic State group, and there have been deep differences between the US and Turkey over this whole buffer zone proposal.
OK, so we can see why Turkey would want this. What have the US and Turkey actually agreed for this new buffer zone?
After 3 days of talks, a breakthrough at last, the Turks saying that they've agreed with the Americans on the setting up of a joint operations centre which will oversee the implementation of this buffer zone idea. There have been major differences between the US and the Turks over big questions such as how wide the buffer zone would be, how long it would be, how it would be patrolled and controlled, and we don't get any sense from today's statement that those big questions have been answered. But the Turks had been getting very frustrated. They'd been massing troops on their border and threatening just to push across the frontier and establish this buffer zone on their own terms. But with today's progress, all that seems very unlikely, and the deal for the moment at least is that the Turks and the US will talk this thing out and put this plan into operation.
OK, so lots of details they still need to agree. But isn't it also hope that this will make it easier for refugees to return from Turkey into Syria?
The Turks certainly hope that that's the case, that Turkey has been hosting 3.5 million Syrian refugees for years now, and the Turkish government hopes that this buffer zone might make it possible to move at least some of them back across the frontier.
Alan Johnston. The Pasig River winds its way for more than 20 kilometres from the largest lake in the Philippines through the capital to Manila Bay. It's long been a dumping ground for waste generated by Manila's 13 million residents. The pollution got so bad that in 1990, ecologists declared the river biologically dead. That's no longer the case, but the river now has a new problem, the dumping of bodies, and locals blame the police. Our Philippines correspondent Howard Johnson reports.
It's dawn on Manila's Pasig River. I've been granted special permission to join the Philippine Coast Guard on a routine patrol. It's a calm and peaceful start to the day, but that's all about to change. It's around 8:30 in the morning here. We've just been patrolling with the Coast Guard here along the Pasig River, and they found a body by the side here. They believe it's about 2 or 3 days old because it's rigid with rigor mortis. A forensics officer inspects the body. It's a man believed to be in his late 20s. There are no gunshot wounds. Suspected cause of death, asphyxiation.
The first time I saw a floating cadaver, I was so shocked, and I cannot eat and I cannot sleep at night.
Mizar Kumbe of the Philippine Coast Guard has since become desensitized to the grisly side of his job. Today's discovery is just another case in a rising number of bodies found in the river. we pass Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte's imposing official residence, the Malacañang Palace. It backs onto the Pasig River. And Mr. Duterte has made a number of references to Manila's waterways in his speeches. During his successful presidential campaign in 2016, he warned drug dealers that after killing them, "I'll dump all of you in Manila Bay and fatten all the fish there." The president's spokesperson, Salvador Panelo, has said in the past that Mr. Duterte's comments are jokes and shouldn't be taken seriously.
That's just an hyperbole. This president is outraged by any kind of irregularity or violation of any law or any threat made against any person.
Along the river from the palace is Tondo, one of the most densely populated and poorest districts of Manila. Historically, it's had one of the highest crime rates in the capital and recently became a major focus of the president's drug war. One resident, who we will call Regine, described the night she heard something heavy hitting the water near her home. To protect her identity, we have not used her real voice.
We got up but could not see anything floating. If that was garbage, then it would float. After maybe 4 days, we heard news that a body had been spotted.
Regine then went on to describe how her community had been repeatedly targeted by Oplan Tokhang operations, the police's code name for drug deal stings. Then she made a startling allegation that in one incident she had witnessed the police killing someone and then dumping the body in the river, an allegation corroborated by her neighbours.
They shot the person once. They were not even in civilian attire but wearing uniforms. They were 6 policemen and a tricycle.
Regine and the other residents we spoke to did not want to reveal their true identities, but 5 different people from the community confirmed they had seen multiple bodies in the river. We put these allegations to the Manila Police District, but they declined to comment.
Howard Johnson in the Philippines. The United Nations has warned that millions of people in Zimbabwe are facing starvation, with more than 5 million needing urgent food aid as a result of a severe drought. The UN is appealing for international funding. Zimbabwe is also gripped by a deepening economic crisis with severe power and water shortages. Our correspondent Andrew Harding reports from Johannesburg.
In the countryside, 2.5 million Zimbabweans, a sixth of the population, are now marching towards starvation, as a senior UN official put it. By early next year, more than 5 million people could be in that position. Food aid is already being provided, but nowhere near enough to cope with the impact of a devastating drought. All this as Zimbabwe wrestles with other enormous challenges. In the cities, life for many revolves around queues for water, for bread. The lights come on for perhaps 6 hours a day, usually overnight. And an old enemy, hyperinflation, is looming, forcing many families to skip meals. As Robert Mugabe watches his country's struggles from faraway Singapore, the government that ousted him insists these economic challenges are the product of tough but necessary reforms and that Zimbabwe is now on the right track. There's still a chance that's true, but for millions across Africa's former breadbasket, life has never been more desperate.
Andrew Harding in Johannesburg. Still to come on this podcast, the first product from the Chernobyl exclusion zone that can be safely consumed, atomic vodka. There have been clashes between the police and supporters of the former Kyrgyz president Almazbek Atambayev north of the capital Bishkek. The police raided Mr. Atambayev's house but were faced by an angry crowd. The former president, who became the first Kyrgyzstan leader to hand over power voluntarily, is accused of corruption, which he denies. The BBC's bureau chief in Bishkek, Almaz Choroyev, was at the scene of the raid. He told me what had happened.
At around 8:30 p.m. local time, Kyrgyz special forces stormed the house of former President Almazbek Atambayev, located on the outskirts of capital Bishkek. The State National Security Committee released a statement that its forces were equipped with rubber bullets and stun grenades, so not live rounds. There were close to 500 Atambayev supporters. They had blocked the roads with trees that they chopped down. They were burning tires and using stones to block the roads. So At about every 50 meters or so, a barricade was built, making it very difficult for cars to drive past. I saw over 8 ambulances attempt to pass to Atambayev's compound. I'm not sure if they made it all the way. According to the Ministry of Health, 15 people are injured and 1 special forces soldier is injured.
Wow, it sounds very dramatic. And what's the background to these allegations of corruption that led to this incident?
On 27th of June, Parliament voted to strip Atambayev's ex-presidential immunity, a move the former president and his supporters argue was illegitimate. This step was done to subpoena the president as a witness on the case of unlawful release of Chechen crime boss Aziz Batukayev back in 2013. So the former president actually refused to obey 3 subpoenas from the Interior Ministry. Moreover, former president is facing an array of corruption allegations, including illegal receipt of land plot, disastrous modernization of Bishkek power plant. Actually, the former president denies all allegations, and I must point out that he has not been charged with anything. These are just allegations.
Almaz Choroyev in Bishkek. Europe's largest pork producer has told the BBC that Britain could suffer shortages of bacon in the event of a no-deal Brexit. The company, Danish Crown, exports processed meat to the UK as Britain doesn't produce enough of its own bacon to supply domestic demand. The threat of tariffs, potential disruption at ports and the low value of sterling could all affect exports of Danish pork products, as Jenny Hill has been finding out.
Danish. Ah, Danish. Ah, Danish. Delicious Danish.
Tempting British taste buds for generations. The UK can't produce enough bacon to satisfy domestic demand, so it imports from the Netherlands, Germany and Denmark, its largest supplier of pork products. And Denmark's tailored its pork industry accordingly. On Berit Nissen's farm, piglets squeal and squirm over one another as an old sow lazily opens an eye to glare at them. It's a cooperative system. Farmers rear a special breed of pig, the animals are then centrally slaughtered, processed and sold to what used to be a reliably hungry market in Britain.
We have made a very special product for the UK market. I think it would be very sad if we cannot sell it for the Englishmen anymore. I am a little worried, but we have had 3 years to prepare for this, so I think we are well prepared.
So is Danish Crown, Europe's biggest pork producer. Not far from the farm, pig carcasses sway along an overhead conveyor belt at their processing plant, which was purpose-built for the UK market. A delicious smell wafts from the smokehouse. They worry here about no-deal tariffs, disruption, but it's the state of sterling that's pushing Danish executives towards other markets.
Of course, we need to look at the alternatives, because if you look at the rhetoric coming out of from the British government, then it's do or die.
Lars Albertsen is global head of sales.
I think Churchill sort of said, if you go through hell, keep walking, and that's what we intend to do.
What does that mean for the British consumer?
I think it'll mean more expensive products. Could it mean empty shelves? Quite possibly.
Ah, Danish. Ah, Danish.
In fact, an OECD study predicts that a no-deal Brexit could reduce Denmark's food exports to Britain, like bacon and butter, by a quarter. The country's worried. At Christmas, its economy minister warned that could amount to a GDP fall of 1%. For now, it's business as usual. At the port of Esbjerg, dockers deftly load and unload containers from a vast freight ship. No time to lose for the bacon bound for Britain, and no customs checks for now.
You really get the sense of how every second counts. No wonder they want to know here whether Britain's bluffing about a no deal, and no wonder they say such a scenario could have such far-reaching consequences, right down to what we eat and where it comes from.
Tasty Danish.
Tasty Danish.
Snacks with Danish.
Already, industry insiders are making predictions. The UK could import cheap bacon from the US or Brazil. Denmark's farmers could sell more to Asia, where demand's rising fast thanks to swine fever.
Tasty Danish.
Tasty Danish.
Denmark's sad to see Britain go. Its farmers, more than most perhaps, conscious of what both partners could stand to lose.
Danish.
And that report was by Jenny Hill. The name Chernobyl has been synonymous with the nuclear disaster there since it happened in 1986. Today, though, journalists have been reporting a rather different story, that of the first officially consumable product from the Chernobyl exclusion zone, vodka, made with grain grown inside the area. Our reporter Victoria Gill has been sampling it.
Very nice Chernobylsky rye grains.
Environmental scientist Dr. Gennady Laptev shows me a handful of grain that was grown on a farm in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, the abandoned area around the damaged nuclear power plant. Grown initially as an experiment, this is now an ingredient in atomic vodka, a spirit made by scientists using rye and water sourced from the exclusion zone. The resulting distilled drink, they promise, is free from contamination.
This is no more radioactive than any other vodka.
Professor Jim Smith has been studying the Chernobyl exclusion zone since 1990. He's now a co-founder of the Chernobyl Spirit Company.
We've had two of the best laboratories in the world looking to see if they can find any radioactivity from Chernobyl, and they haven't found any.
With only a single bottle having been produced so far, I was allowed just a tiny taste.
In Ukraine, we don't say nastarovia in Ukraine, we say budma.
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 Yeah, it's got a lot of flavour, whereas I would just always describe vodka as flavourless. But this is actually quite rich.
The technical definition in the US is a colourless, flavourless liquid. Or we wanted something that had a bit more flavour.
Right.
The team says their project demonstrates that some land in and around the exclusion zone can be used productively and safely. And these scientists turned spirit producers hope to sell Atomic initially to the increasing number of tourists who now visit the exclusion zone. They plan to give profits to local communities that 30 years on are still struggling with the social aftermath of the disaster.
Victoria Gill sampling Chernobyl vodka there. Now imagine suggestions of a US president being impeached and mired in scandal. Nope, we're not talking about the current administration, but the Bill Clinton-Monica Lewinsky saga. Now the affair is being made into a TV drama. Charlotte Gallagher reports.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
One of the most famous quotes by a US president, and those comments by Bill Clinton in 1998 came back to haunt him just months later when he was forced to admit he'd lied under oath and to the American people.
Indeed, I did have a relationship with Miss Lewinsky that was not appropriate. In fact, it was wrong. I misled people, including even my wife.
His lies led to him being impeached, but he was later acquitted and remained in power until 2001. The scandal gripped not just the American public, but people across the world. Monica Lewinsky later said she'd been hounded and terrorised by prosecutors and diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. So it might come as a surprise that she's agreed to co-produce a programme about the affair. Miss Lewinsky said she'd been hesitant and scared, but was now looking forward to fully reclaiming her own story. The actor Beanie Feldstein will play her in the drama. Some have suggested that in today's Me Too era, Monica Lewinsky, who was only 22 when the affair began, would be seen as a victim, not a homewrecker and a figure of fun. She herself now says she sees the relationship as a gross abuse of power. The decision to broadcast the series in the run-up to the presidential election has angered some. The American journalist Mark Harris said it was an abysmal idea and a disservice to a fragile political system. But the chairman of the FX network, John Landgraf, said he didn't think the show was going to decide the election, calling the suggestion hysterical. As for Bill and Hillary Clinton, neither of them are being consulted about the show.
Charlotte Gallagher bringing down the curtain on our podcast there. Indeed, that is all from us for now, but you won't have to wait long for more, as there will be an updated version of the Global News podcast later. In the meantime, if you want to comment on this edition or any of the topics we've discussed in it, you can send us an email. Our address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. I'm Mark Lobel. Until next time, from me and the team, goodbye.